Have you ever wondered why, despite your strength, intelligence, and determination, you still feel a quiet pain when it comes to love? Why, in the moments when you need courage the most, you sometimes find yourself doubting, holding back, or giving more than you receive? You are not weak, you are not broken, but somewhere along the way, society, expectations, and even your own heart may have taught you to silence your truth for the sake of peace, and that is where the struggle begins. This isn't about blame, it's about awareness, because understanding your emotional patterns is the first step toward transforming them. Every woman carries within her an incredible power, the ability to love deeply, lead with compassion, and build connections that change lives. But even the strongest among us have vulnerabilities, especially when it comes to relationships. These weaknesses aren't flaws. They're simply parts of you that need healing, awareness, and strength to overcome. And if you're ready to stop repeating the same cycles, to stop attracting what doesn't serve you, then this message is for you. It will challenge you, yes, but more importantly, it will empower you. You deserve relationships that reflect your worth, not ones that drain your energy or leave you questioning your value. That journey starts by recognizing the hidden ways you might be holding yourself back. Not because you're failing, but because you've been conditioned to believe that silence is strength, that sacrifice equals love, and that putting others first always makes you the bigger person. What if you could rewrite those beliefs? What if you could stand firm in your truth, set boundaries without guilt, and walk away from what no longer serves you, without regret? This is not just another talk about relationships. This is a wake-up call. A moment to look inward and ask, am I truly living my truth in love, or am I compromising pieces of myself until nothing remains? The answer matters, because the way you show up in relationships defines not only your happiness, but your self-respect. If you stay with me through this entire message, you'll uncover the 10 emotional patterns that might be silently shaping your romantic life. More importantly, you'll learn how to rise above them, how to reclaim your voice, how to choose yourself without apology. By the end of this journey, you won't just understand your weaknesses, you'll transform them into strengths. You'll see your past not as a series of mistakes, but as lessons that prepared you for this moment. So take a deep breath, let go of any shame. This is your time to grow, to heal, to become unshakable, and it all begins now, with one simple truth that many refuse to face. You've already taken the hardest step, facing the truth that love should never come at the cost of your self-worth. Now let's dive deeper into the first weakness many women unknowingly carry, the fear of being truly seen. Yes, you heard that right. Not rejection, not abandonment, but the quiet terror of letting someone see the real you. Because deep down you worry that if they did, they might not stay. So you hide behind smiles, agree when you want to say no, and silence your needs to keep the peace. But here's what no one tells you. Hiding yourself doesn't protect you. It only delays the pain. This fear isn't irrational. It was learned. Maybe in childhood, when your voice wasn't encouraged, or in past relationships, when vulnerability led to betrayal. Over time, you built a version of yourself that pleases, adapts, and survives, but doesn't truly live. And every time you fall for someone, you present that polished version, hoping this time it will be enough. But the real tragedy is that you're already more than enough. The moment you stop fearing judgment and start embracing authenticity, something shifts. You begin to attract people who honor your truth instead of demanding your silence. Psychology calls this cognitive dissonance, the gap between who you are and who you pretend to be, and it hurts, not because others don't accept you, but because you stop accepting yourself. That internal conflict creates emotional exhaustion, confusion, and a cycle of unfulfilling relationships. But imagine living without that mask. Imagine speaking your mind without hesitation, setting boundaries without guilt, and walking away from anyone who can't handle the full force of your presence. That's not arrogance, that's alignment. The journey to overcoming this fear starts with self-compassion. You didn't choose to feel this way, but you can choose to change it. Begin by asking yourself one powerful question. What am I afraid they'll discover if I show up fully? Sit with that answer. Let it reveal the wounds that need healing. Then replace those fears with daily affirmations of worthiness. Not fake positivity, but grounded truths. I do not need to shrink to be loved. My voice matters. I deserve relationships where I can be myself. This is your invitation to stop editing who you are for anyone. Because the moment you release the need for approval and embrace your raw, unfiltered truth, you unlock a power that no relationship can break. You become untouchable, not cold or distant, but fearless. And that fearlessness becomes your greatest magnet, not for just any love, but for the right one, the kind that sees you, honors you, and stands beside you, not in front of you, not behind you, but with you. Now that you've begun to peel back the mask and embrace your truth, it's time to confront another silent force shaping your relationships, the need for external validation. This isn't just about seeking approval. It's a deep, often unconscious hunger for proof that you are loved, valued, and worthy. It shows up in the way you monitor likes on a post, wait anxiously for a text, or twist yourself into pretzels trying to impress someone who barely sees you. And every time you do, you hand over control of yourself, worth to someone else's opinion. This habit was not born in weakness. It was built through years of conditioning. From being praised as a child for what you did rather than who you were, to growing up in environments where love felt conditional. Over time, you learned that affection had to be earned, not given freely. So you became the pleaser, the overgiver, the one who constantly proves her value. But here's the hard truth. No amount of validation from outside will ever fill the void inside. Because real confidence doesn't come from others noticing you. It comes from you finally seeing yourself clearly and choosing to stand tall anyway. Psychology calls this the approval trap, a cycle where your emotions rise and fall based on how others respond to you. It creates emotional instability, anxiety, and a constant sense of walking on eggshells in relationships. You start staying in situations far longer than you should, not because they serve you, but because you fear what silence or rejection might mean about your worth. But let this truth break through. Your value is not determined by someone else's attention. You are whole, powerful, and complete regardless of whether anyone chooses to stay. The path to freedom begins with radical self-validation. Start by asking, what would I do right now if I knew no one was watching? That question strips away the performance and brings you face to face with your true desires. Then, replace the chase for approval with daily acts of self-affirmation. Speak to yourself like you would to someone you deeply love. Celebrate your wins without waiting for recognition. Walk away from interactions that leave you feeling smaller than you are. Each time you choose internal validation over external praise, you reclaim a piece of your power. This is not about becoming cold or indifferent. It's about becoming unshakable. When you stop needing constant reassurance, you stop tolerating disrespect. You stop bending to fit into spaces too small for you. And most importantly, you begin attracting people who see and respect your strength, rather than trying to diminish it. The moment you stop looking outside for proof that you matter, you become your own anchor. And when you stand firm in that truth, no relationship can shake you. No silence can unsettle you. No goodbye can erase your worth. You've already begun to reclaim your voice, to stand firm in your truth and stop chasing validation that was never yours to earn. But there's another invisible force that still holds you back, one that masquerades as love but often leads to pain. It's the belief that if you just try hard enough, love will change someone. That if you are patient, kind, and devoted enough, you can transform a man who doesn't truly see you, respect you, or show up for you. This is one of the most painful weaknesses because it feels noble. It sounds like commitment, loyalty, even sacrifice. But in reality, it's a slow surrender of your power. Deep down, you want to believe that love is enough, that your heart has the strength to heal wounds no one else could reach. And maybe, in some rare moments, it can. But psychology warns us about what's called the hope trap, the dangerous illusion that someone will become who they're not simply because you want them to. You begin to ignore red flags, justify bad behavior, and convince yourself that time will fix what's broken. But time only reveals who people truly are. It doesn't change them unless they choose to change themselves. This pattern often starts early. Maybe you saw it modeled in your family where love meant endurance rather than joy. Or perhaps you grew up feeling like you had to fight for every ounce of affection, so now you stay too long out of fear that no one else will come along. The problem is, real love isn't a battle. It's not something you have to beg for or rebuild from pieces. True partnership begins with mutual respect, not rescue missions. And when you make it your mission to fix someone, you send a message, both to them and to yourself, that you're willing to settle for less than you deserve. Let this truth settle deep. You are not responsible for another person's growth. Your love should not be a project. If someone refuses to meet you halfway, if they take more than they give, or if they leave you questioning your worth again and again, it is not weakness to walk away. It is wisdom, it is courage, it is the ultimate act of self-love. So how do you break free? Start by asking the hardest question. Am I staying because this person truly honors me, or because I'm afraid of being alone? Sit with that answer, let it guide you. Then, replace the fantasy of who they could be with the reality of who they are. Stop making excuses. Stop rewriting their story in your mind. When you finally accept that you cannot change anyone but yourself, something shifts. You begin to protect your energy instead of wasting it. You begin to demand what you truly deserve, and in doing so, you open space for love that arrives whole, not waiting to be fixed, but ready to stand beside you as an equal. You've already begun walking away from the illusion that love means fixing what was never yours to mend. But now comes a deeper reckoning, one that strikes at the core of how you see yourself in relationships. It's the quiet, persistent habit of minimizing your own needs, not out of weakness but out of survival. Somewhere along the way, you learned that asking for what you truly wanted felt risky, like it might push people away, create conflict, or label you as too much, so you became small. You swallowed your words. You convinced yourself that giving endlessly was love, when in truth it was self-abandonment disguised as devotion. This pattern didn't start because you were broken. It started because you were trying to belong. Maybe you grew up in an environment where your voice wasn't encouraged, or where love felt conditional on how much you gave of yourself. Over time, you internalized the message, if I want too much, I might lose what I already have. And so you stayed silent when you needed support, smiled through disappointment, and kept your expectations low to avoid being hurt. But here's what silence teaches others. If you don't speak your needs, they will stop listening for them altogether. Psychology calls this emotional suppression, and it has real consequences. When you consistently prioritize others over yourself, your body and mind pay the price, stress builds, resentment festers, joy fades. And worst of all, you begin to lose touch with who you even are beneath the layers of compromise, because every time you say yes when you mean no, every time you downplay your pain to protect someone else's comfort, you send a message to your subconscious, my needs don't matter. And that belief becomes a prison, but here's the truth, you were never meant to be invisible in love. Real connection doesn't require you to erase yourself. In fact, the strongest relationships are built on mutual respect, honest communication, and the courage to show up fully, not just partially. If you keep attracting people who don't meet your needs, ask yourself, have I ever clearly stated what those needs are? Or have I been waiting for someone to read between the lines, to somehow know what I won't say out loud? The shift begins when you stop shrinking to fit into spaces too small for you. Start by identifying one need you've been ignoring, whether it's space, appreciation, honesty, or something else entirely. Then practice saying it out loud, not as a demand but as a declaration of your worth. Watch how the world responds. Some may resist, but those who truly care will rise to meet you, and when you finally stop apologizing for wanting more, you'll attract more. Not because the world changed, but because you did. You've already begun reclaiming your voice, speaking your needs instead of burying them beneath the weight of expectation. But now we must confront a deeper wound, one that often hides behind strength, masquerades as independence, and convinces you that needing someone is a weakness. This is the fear of emotional dependence, the belief that allowing yourself to truly rely on another person will leave you vulnerable, exposed, and ultimately hurt. And so you build walls not out of anger, but out of self-protection. You tell yourself you're fine alone even when your heart aches for connection. You push people away before they can do the same to you. But here's the truth. Human beings are wired for closeness. We were never meant to carry everything alone. This fear didn't come from nowhere. Maybe you were left before you were ready. Maybe you trusted someone who betrayed it. Or perhaps you learned early on that depending on others was unreliable, so you became your own shelter. And yes, that resilience got you through hard times. It kept you going when no one else could. But now, it may be keeping you from something greater, love that feels safe, deep, and unshakable. Because real strength isn't in standing alone, it's in choosing to trust again, even when you know it might hurt. It's in allowing yourself to need, without apology or shame. Psychology calls this emotional intimacy avoidance, and it's more common than you think. When your brain has been through pain linked to closeness, it starts associating vulnerability with danger, so you shut down before things get too real. You pull back when someone gets too close. You convince yourself you don't need anyone, because admitting that you do feels like risking everything. But what you may not realize is that by avoiding emotional dependence, you also avoid the deepest form of healing. The kind that only comes when you let someone see your scars and still choose to stay. So how do you begin to shift this? Start by asking yourself a simple but powerful question. What am I afraid will happen if I let someone in completely? Sit with that answer, let it show you where the old wounds still linger, then slowly begin to practice trust, not all at once, but in small, intentional ways. Share something you normally keep hidden. Ask for support without guilt. Let someone comfort you when you're hurting. Each time you do, you rewire your brain to associate closeness with safety rather than risk. Because here's what you deserve to remember. Needing someone doesn't make you weak. It makes you human, and when you allow yourself to depend on someone who proves themselves worthy of that trust, you open the door to a love that doesn't drain you, but sustains you. A love that doesn't leave you broken, but builds you stronger together. And that kind of connection doesn't weaken you, it completes you, not by replacing you, but by walking beside you, fully seen, deeply loved, and finally understood. You've already begun dismantling the walls that kept you isolated, allowing yourself to need without shame and to trust without fear. But now we must face a hidden force that still holds you back. A quiet but powerful pattern known as sabotage in love. Yes, it's real, and no, it doesn't mean you're broken or unworthy. It means that somewhere deep inside, you believe on some level that you don't deserve lasting, stable connection, or worse, that if things get too good, something will come along to take it away. So you unconsciously create distance, stir up conflict, or pull back just when things start to feel safe. This isn't about being difficult or unloving. It's about internalized fear disguised as control. You may find yourself testing your partner, pushing them to prove their loyalty, or withdrawing emotionally before they can get too close. Maybe you overanalyze every word, searching for reasons to doubt instead of choosing to believe. Or perhaps you attract chaos because it feels familiar, and familiarity often masquerades as comfort, even when it hurts. The truth is, you're not trying to lose love, you're trying to prepare yourself for its loss before it catches you off guard. Psychology calls this the fear of happiness, a subconscious belief that feeling too content leaves you vulnerable to pain. It often stems from early experiences where joy was followed by disappointment, betrayal, or abandonment. Over time, your brain starts associating peace with danger, because the last time you let your guard down, something went wrong, so now you stay on high alert. You look for signs that love won't last, not because you want it to fail, but because you'd rather be ready than surprised. But here's what you must understand. Healing is not just about surviving pain, it's about allowing yourself to receive joy without guilt or suspicion. Because real strength isn't in expecting the worst, it's in choosing to believe in the best, even when your past says otherwise. That doesn't mean ignoring red flags or staying in toxic situations. It means recognizing when your own fears are driving the ship and taking back control. So how do you begin breaking this cycle? Start by catching yourself the moment you feel the urge to push love away. Ask, is this fear based on what's actually happening, or what I expect to happen? Then, instead of reacting, pause, breathe, remind yourself that you are allowed to be happy, that love does not have to end in heartbreak, and most importantly, that you are worthy of good things even when your mind tries to convince you otherwise. Each time you choose to stay present, to lean into peace instead of panic, you rewire your brain to associate safety with joy instead of threat. And slowly, steadily, you begin attracting relationships that reflect that truth. Ones built not on fear, but on trust. Not on survival, but on love that lifts you higher than you ever thought possible. You've already begun to release the fears that once controlled your heart, stepping into a new version of yourself, one who no longer runs from love to feel safe, but stays rooted in it even when fear whispers. But now we must confront one of the most deeply ingrained habits that continues to shape your relationships, the belief that you must earn love through effort, perfection, and constant giving. This isn't just about being kind or generous. It's about carrying the weight of proving your worth over and over again, as if love is something you have to work for instead of something you were born deserving. This pattern was not chosen, it was learned. Maybe you grew up in an environment where affection felt conditional, where praise only came with achievement, or where silence meant safety. Over time, you internalized the message, if I want to be loved, I must be more patient, more understanding, more everything. So you became the one who always initiates, who always forgives, who always bends first. You told yourself it was strength, but deep down it was exhaustion disguised as devotion, because real love doesn't demand performance. It thrives on presence. Psychology calls this relational self-abandonment, a tendency to suppress your true feelings and needs in order to maintain harmony, often at the cost of your own peace, and it's exhausting. Because every time you stretch yourself beyond your limits to keep someone close, you send a message to your subconscious, I am not enough as I am. That belief becomes a cycle. You give too much, you feel drained, you question your value, and then you give even more to try to fix what was never broken in the first place. But here's the truth, you do not need to earn love. You deserve it simply because you exist. The moment you stop seeing love as something you have to chase or prove, you begin to attract relationships where you are seen, valued, and cherished without conditions. No tests, no performances, just mutual respect, shared effort, and emotional safety. So how do you break free? Start by asking yourself, am I in a relationship where I feel like I can relax and be myself? Or do I constantly feel like I have to show up perfectly? Sit with that answer, let it guide you, then replace the habit of overgiving with the practice of self-holding. Speak kindly to yourself when you make mistakes. Set boundaries when you feel taken for granted. Walk away from anyone who makes you feel like you must earn their presence, because here's what you deserve to know. You are worthy of love that shows up effortlessly, that feels light instead of heavy, that gives back as much as it receives. And when you finally believe that, you stop settling for anything less. You stop stretching yourself thin. You stop chasing what should already be yours. And in that moment, you become unshakable, not because you never feel doubt, but because you finally trust in your right to be loved exactly as you are. You've already begun to release the exhausting belief that love must be earned, and in doing so, you've stepped into a deeper truth. You are worthy of connection without condition, effort, or proof. But now we must face a hidden force that still holds you back, a quiet but powerful habit known as emotional dependency on external validation for happiness. This isn't about needing someone to complete you, it's about unconsciously tying your sense of self-worth to how others treat you, especially in romantic relationships. It shows up when their mood dictates yours, when their silence feels like punishment, and when their attention becomes your oxygen, and every time you do this, you give away your power to someone else's choices. This pattern often starts early. Maybe you were raised in an environment where your value was tied to how well you met other people's needs, or perhaps you experienced love that felt conditional, given freely only when you performed, smiled, or gave more than you had. Over time, you internalize the message, if I want to feel good, I must first make sure they are happy with me. So you became hyper-aware of their moods, adjusted your behavior to match their expectations, and silenced your own discomfort to keep the peace. But here's what no one tells you. Real confidence doesn't come from being liked, approved of, or pursued. It comes from knowing your worth regardless of anyone's reaction. Psychology calls this emotional fusion, a state where your inner peace is dictated by someone else's energy rather than your own. It creates anxiety, instability, and a constant need for reassurance. You begin to monitor texts, analyze tone, and obsess over small shifts in behavior, not because you're insecure, but because your brain has been trained to believe that your safety depends on keeping the relationship stable at all costs. But true stability doesn't come from controlling someone else's emotions. It comes from grounding yourself in your own. So how do you reclaim your power? Start by recognizing the moments when you begin to lose yourself in someone else's energy. Ask, am I reacting to what's actually happening, or am I projecting fear onto silence? Then, instead of chasing answers outside yourself, return inward. Remind yourself that your peace is not dependent on someone else's mood, that your value remains unchanged even if they don't see it right now, and most importantly, that you are whole, capable, and strong enough to stand firm even when things feel uncertain. Each time you choose to regulate your own emotions instead of outsourcing them to someone else, you rewire your brain to find stability within. And slowly, steadily, you begin attracting relationships that reflect that strength, ones where you are loved not for what you can do, but for simply who you are, where your presence is cherished, your boundaries respected, and your peace protected. Because the moment you stop needing someone else to make you feel okay, you become unshakable, not because life never shakes you, but because you know how to stand through the storm. You've already begun reclaiming your power, stepping into a version of yourself that no longer depends on someone else's energy to feel whole. But now we must confront a deeply rooted habit, one that often hides behind strength and masquerades as loyalty, the belief that walking away from a relationship means failure. This isn't just about staying in something painful. It's about clinging to the idea that if you just try harder, love will eventually become what you hoped it would be, and so you stay too long, not because the relationship still serves you, but because you fear what leaving might say about you. This pattern didn't start because you're weak or indecisive. It started because you were taught that real love means endurance, that true commitment is about pushing through even when your heart is breaking. Somewhere along the way, you internalized the message, if I leave, I am giving up. If I walk away, I have failed. But here's what no one tells you sometimes. Walking away is the most powerful act of self-love. It doesn't mean you don't care. It means you finally care enough about yourself to stop pretending pain is proof of devotion. Psychology calls this loss aversion, the tendency to hold on to something familiar simply because letting go feels like losing, even when staying causes more suffering than leaving ever could. You begin to focus on what you've already invested rather than what you're continuing to lose. Time, energy, pieces of yourself, and so you convince yourself that things will change, that maybe next time will be different, that if you just wait a little longer, everything will finally fall into place. But waiting for a future that hasn't arrived only keeps you trapped in a present that no longer serves you. So how do you break free? Start by asking the hardest question, am I staying for love, or am I staying out of fear? Fear of being alone, fear of starting over, fear of facing the truth that this wasn't what you thought it was. Sit with that answer, let it guide you. Then, instead of focusing on what you're losing, ask yourself, what am I gaining by staying? Is it peace, growth, respect, or is it silence, exhaustion, and slow erosion of who you truly are? Here's the truth, choosing yourself is not weakness. It is courage beyond measure. Walking away from something that no longer nourishes your soul is not defeat. It is transformation. Because every time you release what no longer aligns with your worth, you make space for something better, not because the world changed, but because you did. So take a deep breath. Recognize that you are allowed to close a chapter before the story ends. That you are allowed to honor your needs even if others don't understand. and most importantly, that you are allowed to walk away not because you failed, but because you finally chose yourself. And in doing so, you become unshakable, not because you never loved, but because you finally love yourself enough to let go